Hey everyone, welcome back to another Roman Reacts. We are here tonight to watch another video for you today. This one's a bit of an interesting one. It's actually talking about the it's a Warhammer video. It's talking about the Praetorian Guard, and it's called Orcs Drift Massacre at Big Toof River. And that's basically what the title is. And it's another video from Janovich, and I've certainly enjoyed his work that he's been able to do. And we're going to be giving this a watch and see what's his latest lore video he has. So yeah, we'll just dive on in, have some fun. Yeah, the Praetorian Guard are basically like the old British Guard when they fought against the Zulu and from the older years, so whatnot. But yeah, we're just gonna give this a watch and have a go. And yeah, see what this little lore tidbit comes up. So yeah, here we go. 3, 2.
Hello and thanks for watching. Before the start of this video, I have two short announcements to make. As you may know, the lore videos are made by just me and my amazing voice actor. There's no way I could have done all of this without his great assistance. However, he absolutely refuses to accept any of my money for his great assistance and insists on doing it for free. After some nudging, he has finally considered accepting donations and launched his own Ko-Fi page. It would mean a lot to me if you guys showed him the appreciation he deserves, so if you got some funds to spare for the absolute legendary Mad Lad, don't hesitate to go over there. The second announcement I have is I have just launched my board game. It is called Iron Resolve Western Front. It's a World War I themed strategy board game. I need at least 100 backers to be successful in funding it. So if you're interested, please check out the video I just uploaded on my channel. Now let's get back to the video.
Nice.
The system of Montar is a fairly isolated and underpopulated system in the Segmentum Tempestus. Due to its relatively close proximity to the infamous desert planet of the Talon, it falls under the protection of the Imperial Guard units of the Talon Desert Raiders. It became the target of an orc war when an ancient space hulk infested by a green-skinned clan called the Blood Hands entered the system. Their warlord, by the name of Bulgarg, was determined to conquer every planet in the Montar system and carve out his own orc empire. The upcoming orc boss was still in the process of amassing a large army worthy of a true war, and so the sparsely populated Montar system was the perfect target for his first conquest. The local human government did not possess the resources and manpower to mount an effective resistance to the invasion. But before striking at the capital on Montar Prime, the orcs' cunning plan was to set up a base of operation on the edge of the system, on a desert planet called Montar 7. By collecting scrap from the servers, they would be able to build war machines and weapons that would bolster their forces in the coming war. And so, the orcs' troops disembarked from the Space Hulk and made planetfall. They began the construction of their base at a place that they called Big Toof River. The invasion did not go unnoticed, however. Planetary Governor Kinwa on Montar Prime sent out a distress call with the urgent request for reinforcements, before the Greenskins would be able to spread mayhem and destruction through the rest of the system. Fortunately for Kinwa, his request for help was received by Lord Commander Sheridan, and quickly acted upon. He had recently concluded a successful but gruesome campaign to rid his sector of a large Dark Eldar pirate fleet. With the Xenos renegades finally out of the way, he would fortunately be able to commit his remaining forces towards the newly arrived invasion in defense of Montar. Preliminary reconnaissance reports indicated that the orc army was, as of yet, of a limited size. Although of no immediate threat now, it would be unwise to allow the orc infestation to settle on Montar 7 uncontested. The new war would inevitably grow larger and more fearsome with every passing day. And so the commander decided it would be better to strike decisively now. The troops that were chosen to reinforce the Montar system were the 24th Praetorian Guard. All of the soldiers in the regiment were veterans from the campaign against the Eldar pirates. These hardened troops had lived up well to the fighting traditions and reputation of their homeworld, but had suffered heavy casualties in doing so. Of the 1,500 troops that had left Pretoria long ago, only 300 now remained. The most senior officer left alive was the 21-year-old Captain Glean of C Company. To overcome their depleted ranks, the 24th was hastily reinforced by the remnants of the 135th Talon Desert Raiders. Even though the bulk of forces were Praetorians, Colonel Olteray from Talon was put in overall command. While these troops were mustering for battle, the Imperium would consult with the local clan of Blood Axe's mercenaries. These Orc mercenaries have a track record of cooperation with the Imperium, and during the previous campaign had been hired as scouts. Their clan had once been a powerful one, but their friendly dealing with the Humies fell in poor taste with the Orc society. As a result, their clan was overthrown and the survivors went into hiding. Now they continue dealing with humans out of necessity, as they have become dependent on subsidies of teeth paid by the Imperium. They were able to inform Lord Sheridan with valuable information, although they had never personally met the supposed warlord Bulgarg. He wasn't a very big deal within Orc society, and only a minor war boss of an irrelevant tribe. However, what the commander was most worried about was Gargants. These brutish titans that Orcs were able to construct from mere scraps could pose a significant threat. But the Blood Axes assured him that if he struck now, these massively powerful effigies of war would be nowhere finished yet. Surely the Praetorians had nothing to worry about and would be able to deal with the newly formed Orc war quite effortlessly. Reassured by this news, Lord Sheridan immediately dispatched the army to Montar 7, with orders to completely destroy the Orc base and leave not a single greenskin alive. The Imperial landing went unopposed, and the Praetorian 24th disembarked in good order some 5 miles away from Big Toof River. Colonel Olteray would waste no time in moving against the Orcs. Lord Sheridan had instructed him to deploy the company of Blood Axes to scout out the Orc camp, but the colonel did not trust the mercenaries one bit, especially in an operation against their own kind. If the scout group was spotted or worse, colluded with their Xenos kin, it might ruin the element of surprise. Once all these troops had successfully made planetfall, the colonel ordered his troops to advance. His regiment was split into 3 main columns, named after their commanders. The first of these, Force Castor, consisted of the Talon Rough Rider companies and tanks. The other columns, Force Glean and Force Teray, were all made up of the Praetorian troops, with Olteray himself leading the third column in person. His plan for the assault was to use the fast-moving Force Castor as shock troops to perform a devastating surprise attack. Meanwhile, Force Glean would mount the regiment's chimeras and sweep around the camp, attacking from behind and blocking off the Orcs' retreat. Their task was to cut down any enemy that tried to escape the battle, to ensure the foe would be massacred to the last. The infantry of Force Teray would march up to the battle by foot and deliver the final blow. 3rd platoon of Force Glean and soldiers would be left behind in a location called Glazer's Farm. The site had been named after Conrad Glazer, a farmer who gave his name to the little creek when he settled there. It had been uninhabited for many years now, and the buildings were in a state of decay when they set up camp there. They were tasked with guarding the regiment's supplies and taking care of the sick and wounded in a makeshift hospital. Their chimeras would be lent to the rest of the company in order to make them fully mobile in the attack against Big Toof River. As the army moved on, the colonel expertly used the crests in the terrain to hide his troops from sight until the moment of the attack. His scouts reported that the Orcs' base lay south of the Big Toof River. The river itself had 2 shallow fords that could serve as crossings towards the encampment. The thick cloud of smog of industry hanging above the camp made it difficult to gauge the Orcs' true strength. However, the colonel's strategy had already begun to fall apart before the battle could begin in earnest. Before Force Glean had been able to get into position behind the Orc camp, the confident troops of Castor had moved ahead of the regiment and prematurely began their assault. The Rough Riders and tanks traversed the steep embankment and began crossing the river. Unbeknownst to the Imperial troops, the Bloodhands would not be caught by surprise, however. How they had become aware of the Imperial landing remained uncertain, but the Orcs were combat ready. It would perhaps be unsurprising that this could lead to rumors that the Blood Axes had informed their kin of the impending attack. Such accusations would undoubtedly feed mistrust and complicate further cooperations with the dubious greenskin mercenaries. Regardless, the cunning war boss Bulgarg had prepared a crude ambush. His troops lay in wait for the best moment to strike at the Imperial forces. As it turned out, the humans weren't the only ones who could use the obfuscating terrain to their advantage. As the Imperial forces approached, the entire Orc town had burst into action. The Orcs had not had a proper good old scrap for a long time and were eager for battle. Rather than wait behind their barricades for the Imperium to come to them, dozens of snakebite boar boys now charged out the gate directly at the vanguard column. Behind them, a mob of boys rushed up to join the fray. A flurry of long-range weapons were fired from the camp and began to fall upon the surprised Talon ranks. From all directions, frenzied orcs emerged from cover ready to fight. The Rough Rider spear tip was met by the charge of the boar boys, and the mounted troops furiously clashed in the outskirts of the orc shantytown. Storm boys launched themselves over the river to land amongst the fray. The overwhelming green tidal wave washed against the Talon ranks. Within moments, Force Caster would find themselves almost completely surrounded. With their backs against the Big Toof River, the troops bravely stood their ground waiting for the rest of the regiment to come reinforce them. Over the Voxnet, Colonel Alteray ordered Force Glean to double back and begin an attack against the Orc lines in order to relieve pressure. But by now, many Orc fighter bombers had already taken to the skies. From up high, their pilots had spotted the mechanized approach and warned the war boss. A mob of Orc bikers raced out of the camp to block the Chimera's path before the two Imperial forces could link up. On the northern slopes, the Chimeras found themselves caught on unfavorable ground against the much more agile Cult of Speed. Unable to move forward, they were forced on the defensive while the Orc buggies raced in circles around them. Meanwhile, Colonel Alteray and his infantry marched double time to enter the battle. When they arrived, they had a clear view of the carnage that was enveloping. The colonel couldn't believe his eyes. Not only was his entire force in complete disarray, on the northern horizon to their rear, Gargants had appeared. The Orc Titans were accompanied by moving Orc battle fortresses. They had moved into battle as soon as the trap had been sprung. Now their fearsome weapons were blasting his troops to smithereens. Large impacts crashed among the Talon and Praetorian ranks, carelessly taking both human and greenskin lives with every shot. It turned out that the intelligence gained from the Blood Axes had been completely wrong. Either Warboss Bulbarg had transported these Titans from his Space Hulk down to the surface, or successfully constructed them on the planet. However the Orcs had managed it, the Imperial troops were in big trouble. The desperate vanguard had been pinned in place, but the Orcs had cunningly left an opening for the panicked Imperials to retreat back across the river. With their ranks being ripped to shreds, the remnants of Force Caster fell for the trap and attempted to make their escape from the encirclement. Unfortunately, the riverbanks had turned into a slippery sludge by the many hooves and tank treads moving over them, making it almost impossible to traverse. The river's currents swept soldiers off their feet and tanks got stuck in the mud. To make things worse, their Baneblade got its left treads blown up. Unable to move forward, the huge stationary tank was now blocking the path. The retreat turned into a disorganized rout. The Talon forces were cut to pieces by the Orc boys chasing them down through the narrow choke point. There was little Alteray could do to save the Talon vanguard. Charging into the battle with bayonets would be completely suicidal. Instead, he ordered his infantry to form a line and volley fire into the Orcs. The least they could do was attempt to kill as many filthy Xenos as possible. But their arrival would not go uncontested. Another large mob of boys emerged from the camp and made straight towards them. The organized ranks of Praetorians would be able to fight off the Orcs' advance with their lasguns quite effectively. But without anti-aircraft weapons, there was little they could do to stop the constant harassment from the Orc fighter bombers above them, whose payloads and strafing runs were tearing holes into their ranks. Pinned in place by the Orc bikers, Force Glean moved their chimeras into a defensive circle. The red-coated Praetorian soldiers prepared to sell their lives as dearly as possible. But now that Force Caster has been as good as wiped out, they knew the greenskin hordes would march on them next and swamp their position. Volley after volley of lasgun blasts were fired into the Orc. Soon the slopes around the guardsmen were littered with hundreds of green corpses. But supported by the devastating firepower from their Gargants, the Orcs kept coming with a complete disregard for their own lives. Even the battle-hardened warriors from Praetoria could not stand against the massive horde of greenskins hurling themselves again and again at the rapidly shrinking circle of guardsmen. Without support, the brave Praetorians were doomed. Within an hour of arriving at the massive Orc encampment, every single member of Force Caster and Force Glean was dead. Colonel Alteray had no option but to retreat towards the east. Fortunately for the Imperial troops, the Orcs were not too interested in pursuit. Only a handful of Orcs gave chase to the Praetorian survivors, while most were too busy looting the corpses and scrapping the Imperial vehicles. But the battle for Montar 7 wasn't over yet. The Orcs weren't satisfied with their war bounty. and without more humies to fight, they quickly grew bored. Rallied up by their boss, a large mob set out from camp to go and raid the humies' landing site at Glazer's Creek. The Imperial landing had caught the attention of the local population. Assuming the Imperial forces would decisively deal with the Orc invaders, several civilians had come to pay a visit to the liberators at Glazer's Creek. Amongst these was the old farmer Glazer, who had returned to his abandoned homestead to see what all the commotion was about. The unsuspecting Third Company could see a cloud of dust appear on the horizon. At first they assumed it to be the Praetorians returning from an Imperial victory, but as the enemy got closer, and they could hear the Orc war chants, they quickly realized their mistake. With the Orcs' horde closing in and no vehicles to mount a quick escape, the Praetorians of Third Company and civilians now found themselves trapped at the old farm. Glazer's farm lay in a shallow valley. The defenders would not know what they were up against exactly until the very last moment when the Orcs came charging over the crests of the hills surrounding it. But Captain Kane did not have to be a tactical genius to realize he would be drastically outnumbered. Thousands of Orcs would be on their way. To make matters worse, the remnants of Force Terrae were still being chased across the desert by Orc boys. Despite their fighting retreat, they would not be able to make it back to the landing site. The Third Company would be completely on their own. In order to bolster the defenses, they equipped the civilians with las rifles. One peculiar figure amongst them was Hooky the Rattling. The Abhuman's abilities with a sniper rifle would be of great help in the coming fight, and so he was stationed on the top of the old windmill where he would have a clear shot across the area. Even amongst the sick and wounded, those able to hold a weapon were pressed into service. The defenders prepared to hold their ground to the last man. From the surrounding hills, hordes of Orc warriors swarmed down towards the tiny farm from all sides, excitedly shouting their primal war cries and wildly firing their shooters into the air. At the farm, Captain Kane had prepared the meager Imperial defenses carefully. With men all along the entire perimeter fence and heavy weapon teams on the roof of the main building, their lasguns opened fire at the greenskins that came into range, cutting down many of the savage Xenos. Las cannon and heavy bolter fire raked the bloodhands with devastating firepower. Hooky the Rattling proved his marksmanship by picking off dozens of greenskins from the perch at the top of the windmill. Demoralized by the unexpected amount of casualties, the Orcs' advance began to slow down. Instead of charging directly into a melee, the boys stopped at a distance and returned fire with their shooters. The initial spray of gunfire killed some of the defenders. In return, the las cannon destroyed an Orc dreadnought that blew up in a spectacular explosion. For now, the Orcs decided it was to their best interest to retreat back into the hills and regroup for the next attack. After some encouraging words from their war boss, the Bloodhands regained their resolve, and another wave of greenskins charged wildly at the defenders. The war boss had kindly instructed them not to stop this time, and despite suffering heavy losses, the Orcs managed to reach the defenders. A scuffle broke out amongst the perimeter fence, and they finally managed to break in on the west side. The Praetorians and civilians bravely stood their ground, but the brute strength of the greenskins killed many in the close-quarter combat. The heavy bolter continued pouring explosive shells into the filthy Xenos ranks. From this close range, it was like shooting fish in a barrel. The greenskins were cut down in swaths. Unable to overwhelm the defenders, the battered Orcs broke and ran once more. As the enemy retreated, Third Company was given some reprieve to count their own losses. The makeshift hospital is bursting with the injured and dying, including most of the civilians. Many had fallen victim to the axes of the Orcs, and the company had been whittled down to half their original strength, but they knew the Orcs would return soon. This would not be the time to mourn the dead. The war boss was severely disappointed with the poor performance of his boys, and may have bashed a few knobskulls to get the point across. This time, the displeased war boss will lead the charge himself. As another huge wave of Orcs charged down from the hills, the weary defenders prepared to repulse them. In a moment of bravado, a young guardsman wielding a flamer leaves the perimeter and moves forward to burn the advancing horde. Unfortunately, the results of his reckless bravery are less than impressive, and he is personally bashed to the ground by the war boss himself. There is nothing the other Praetorians can do for him as the greenskins trample over his broken body. On both sides of the farm, the Xenos brutes break into the perimeter. Farmer Glazer kills one of the Orcs before he succumbs to the sheer weight of numbers. The Orcs are clambering onto the roof of the hospital. They're about to be overrun. Captain Kane shouts words of encouragement to his soldiers during this last stand. In a last-ditch effort, some of the wounded emerge from their sickbeds to join the fight. Their desperate act of bravery momentarily turns the tide, and the greenskins lose heart and run once more. Although they've pushed the orcs back for now, the defenders' losses are grim. After the close encounter, 3rd Company has very little left in the way of fighting men. It is unlikely that they'll be able to hold out against another wave of attackers. But as long as the Praetorian banner is held high, their morale will not falter. Every single one of them is ready to give their life to the last. The bulk of survivors take position on top of the hospital building and patiently await their foe. All around the farm, the ground is littered with wrecked orc vehicles and bodies from the previous assaults. Although the raiding mob is down in strength, their war boss would not relent. With classic orc enthusiasm and suitable violence, he rallied his boys once more. For the 4th time, the orcs come charging over the hills. Things look desperate for the beleaguered defenders of Glazer's farm. Only 17 men remain fit to fight. They're low on munitions, and the orcs' attack shows no sign of abating. The approaching greenskins roar loudly to intimidate their foes. In response, Captain Kane encourages his men and tells them to make every shot count. One of the veterans prepares a vortex bomb that they have been saving for a desperate moment. He hurls it into the oncoming horde, and it explodes with a flash that engulfed the orcs. The immense destruction vaporizes all the blood hands in its blast range. There are too few guardsmen to check the orcs' advance, and the attackers clamber over the fence uncontested. As if things weren't bad enough, yet more orcs appear on the eastern horizon and rush down the slopes to join the battle, eager to kill the stubborn human resistance. Greenskins rampage through the compound while the Praetorians fire at them from the rooftops. They start climbing up the windmill towards the rattling sniper, who has so far been reliably killing orcs with every shot. Fortunately for Hookie, Captain Kane had wisely anticipated this and positioned a couple of his men inside of the mill. Every orc that climbs up the ladder is easily repulsed and sent tumbling down towards their death. The orcs are scrambling to get on top of the hospital roof to take down the devastating heavy bolter firing down upon them, but the Praetorians defend the weapon and its gunner at all costs. On the ground below, Captain Kane is cornered by the war boss and several orcs. He valiantly defends himself in close-quarter combat, but eventually succumbs to the boss's brutal blows. In his death throes, he shouts his final words to his men. "Praetorians, we fight to the last man." With the death of their commanding officer, things look bleaker than ever before. And yet the orc numbers are thinning against their defiant last stand. The orc boys gave up climbing the windmill and chose to fire their shooters instead. This proved much more devastating as they killed the last 2 defenders of the mill. Apart from Hookie, who is still firing away on top of the mill, all Imperial soldiers are now embroiled in hand-to-hand combat. Despite everything, their regimental banner still waves proudly up high. The war boss clumsily manages to climb up on the hospital's roof, ready to finish this once and for all. But just as he does, his orc boys appear to lose heart and break. These cowardly creatures suffered too many casualties. The grunts have had enough. If the big boss wants to capture this farm so badly, he can go and do it himself. The war boss is left staring down the few remaining Praetorians. The ragtag survivors are covered in blood and bruises, but their bayonets are held at the ready, pointing at the menacing brute. He can see the defiance blazing in their eyes. He gives one of the red-uniformed corpses at his feet one last kick and grudgingly decides to fall back too. As far as the boss is concerned, it's an insignificant farm with next to no valuable loot or scrap anyway. The Humies can have it. The beaten orcs retreat all the way back towards their encampment at Big Toof River to lick their wounds. For now, the battle is over. The defense at Glazer's Creek is a heroic Imperial victory. After suffering the devastating defeat at Big Tooth River, Colonel Alterai was never to be given independent command again. It is said that his last words many years later were, "Let me go to my fate, brothers. I must have peace from the ghosts that haunt me." The reckless assault straight into an orc ambush and the resulting slaughter of his force tormented his conscience until the day he died. Relatively few records remain of the aftermath of the defense of Glazer's Creek. The fate of Hookie the Rattling Sniper, the unsung hero of the battle, remains unknown, for he disappeared shortly after the battle was over. The Imperial victory would not be able to stop the orcs from expanding their base on Montar 7 and conquer other planets in the system. Despite the Imperium's best efforts to keep the Greenskins' conquest in check, Warlord Bulbarg would go on to successfully establish his orc empire within the Montar system. It would, however, not be the last time the humble farm was the location for a battlefield. Despite being so close to the orc base at Big Tooth River, it remained as an Imperial stronghold against the invaders. Many years later, the 24th Ventrilian nobles used the farmstead as their own base of operations, defending it against the continuous orc onslaught. The building was inherited by the son of the fallen Glazer Sr., and so the name of Glazer's Creek remained. Fortunately for the Imperium, for unbeknownst reasons, Warlord Bulgarg, along with the bulk of his army, one day embarked on their Space Hulk and left the system. The war has not been sighted since. It is assumed that the craft was destroyed in the warp, but no one can be certain. Perhaps one day the orcs will reappear and terrorize another sector, but their reputation as fearsome warriors will forever be tarnished by their humiliating defeats at Glazer's Creek. Lord Sheridan recovered from the military setbacks and went on to reconquer the Montar system from the orcs that had remained after Bulgarg had left. In the forefront of this redemption campaign was the newly raised 24th Praetorian Guard, ready to avenge those fallen on Montar 7. Third Company's heroic final stand at Glazer's Creek is chronicled as one of the greatest examples of the renowned Praetorian fighting spirit. It was their dogged perseverance in the face of overwhelming odds that allowed the 24th Praetorian Guard to rise from the ashes. The legacy of their iron discipline and bravery will always be remembered. The Praetorian banner continues to be raised high in honor of Captain Kane and the men under his command to this very day.
That's cool. That's really cool. What makes this so unique in terms of just seeing how the Praetorian Guard like managed to hold their ground. Basically what they've, it's kind of like a recreation of Zulu in a way, but overall just hearing about the tactics that they use to hold the ground, trying to use as much tactics as against the orcs. When initially they thought they had the advantage, but some of them pushed too soon to really do any real damage, or they didn't wait, they didn't have time to reconnaissance. And sometimes it's in war, it's like that can prove super fatal, because those who try to assume command and try to win the battles end up being the first to die, because a lot of them end up, well, a lot of them end up being just fallen. And it's so cool to see that in Warhammer 40k there's so many different stories, so many different little things here and there, and you just get so immersed into it, and just like the bravery of the men who fought, and just it's so cool to see, especially unnamed Imperial Guard regiments in 40k universe. They don't get that much love, and because most time you hear about the main stuff now and then, just having to hear about these smaller ones, small scale stories, it just is really cool to see. Anyways, that's it for me, guys. Hope you enjoyed my reaction. Hope you enjoyed watching and getting my little feedback here. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed. And as always, thanks for watching. Romans, salute.